The stage didn't come to a full stop. It slowed at the bend below Stone Tank long enough for the driver to hand down a battered carpet bag and a smaller bundle tied in oilcloth. And then it was rolling on again, the wheels throwing a fan of dry snow, the whole rattling outfit shrinking down the Cinnabar road until the cold ate the sound of it. I stood in the station door with a coffee pot in one hand and watched 3 people I had never seen standing in my yard, looking after that coach the way a man looks after the last boat off a sandbar. A woman, 2 children. That was all. The woman had hold of a little girl's hand and a smaller boy stood half behind her skirt, and not one of the 3 of them had a coat fit for the country they'd been left in. It was the second week of November in the high basin, and the wind off the Sage Flats had teeth that morning. I thought, plain as anything, that fool Hardesty has left his passengers at the wrong stop. The next eastbound wasn't due for 9 days, and the last westbound of the season had just rolled away into the gray. "Ma'am," I called, "you've been set down wrong. There's nothing here but the relay." She turned. She was younger than the set of her shoulders had made me think, 4 and 20 maybe, with a face gone thin and a chin that came up when I spoke, the way a chin comes up when a person has had to hold it there a good long while. "This is Stone Tank," she said. "It wasn't a question." "It is." "Then we're set down right." She picked up the carpetbag herself before I could move to it. "We're bound for Tama Wells. The driver said you'd have the schedule and the next coach through." "Next coach through is in the spring," I said. I have thought back on that morning more times than I can count, and I have never once been able to soften what I said or how I said it. I was a hard man then. I'd kept the station alone the better part of 6 years, and I'd worn the solitude until it fit me like a glove I didn't take off even to sleep. I said it the way I'd have said it to a freighter or a horse buyer, flat and done. The little girl looked up at her sister. The boy looked at his boots. And the woman, Esther Marsh, though I didn't have her name yet, stood very still, and I watched her do the arithmetic of it behind her eyes, the way I've seen men do it at a card table when the last card has fallen wrong, the careful, empty look that comes over a person when they understand the thing is lost, and they are deciding in that second not to let it show. "Spring," she said. "Stage line shuts the high run when the passes go," I said. "Has to. We'll have 8 foot on the Cinnabar grade by January." I set the coffee pot down inside the door. "Where in Tama Wells were you headed? Somebody could carry word come a thaw." "My uncle," she said it carefully. "A Sa Renfrew, he has a freight yard there." I knew the name. I want to be honest about the next part because it is the part I'm least proud of, and because everything that came after turns on it. I knew the name Renfrew, and I knew the freight yard in Tama Wells, and I knew that old Renfrew had died in the spring, pleurisy, they said, and that the yard had been sold to the Coombs outfit by summer. I'd hauled freight for both. I knew it the way you know the weather. And I stood there in my own doorway and I did not say it. I told myself I wasn't sure. I told myself it wasn't my business to be the one. The truth, which I came to later, was simpler and worse. I did not want 3 people wintering in my house, and a man will tell himself a great deal to keep his quiet. "You'd best come in out of the wind while you decide what's to be done," I said. "There's a fire." That much I could do without giving anything up, or so I thought. The boy was the first one through the door. He was maybe 7 and cold straight through, and he went to the stove like a moth to a lamp and put both his hands flat against the warm iron and shut his eyes. The girl came next, 9 or 10, watchful, her sister's watchfulness already learned and worn small. Esther came last, and she stopped just inside and looked the room over, the long plank table, the bunks along the wall for waiting passengers, the harness and the stores, the rifle on its pegs, the one window gone gold with frost, and I saw her take its measure not as a guest takes a room, but as a woman takes a place she is going to have to make do in. "I'm Jonah Creel," I said. "I keep the relay." "Esther Marsh, this is Lucy, that's Tom." She unwound a thin shawl from the girl's neck. We won't be trouble to you, Mr. Creel. Only tell me the honest size of the trouble and I'll meet it. I've met worse. I should have told her then. The honest size of the trouble was that her uncle was a year in the ground and there was no yard, no renfew, nothing in Tama Wells for her but a sold lot and a winter on a strange road. I had it in my mouth. The boy, Tom, opened his eyes and looked up at me from beside the stove, and he said, "Mister, is there anything to eat?" Lucy gave me hers at the noon stop, and she said she wasn't hungry, but she was. And the girl's face went scarlet, furious at being told on, and Esther said Tom in a voice that broke on the one word, and I understood all at once that the last coin was gone, that there'd been no noon meal but the girls split, that these three had ridden the high run on nothing, betting the whole of what they had left on an uncle 2 days west. I didn't tell her, I put a skillet on instead. That is how it started, not with any noble thing, but with a skillet of fried mush and salt pork, and a man who could not make himself say a true word, and 3 people eating like the food might be taken back. I gave them the passenger bunks that first night and lay awake in my own, and listened to the wind, and worked the thing over. I could put them on the next freight wagon. Coombs ran an ox train down the Cinnabar to Tama Wells once more before the snow shut it, 10 days out, maybe 12. I could send them to town with a note, and let the town and the county sort what was to be done with a woman and 2 children and no kin and no coin. There was a place for that. Every county had one. The county home took in the orphaned and the indigent and put them to work and kept them fed after a fashion, and they split them. That was the thing I knew and couldn't unknow once I'd thought it. They split the children from the woman, sent the young ones where there was room, and the room for a girl of 10 and a boy of 7 was never the same room. I'd buried a son. He'd lived 11 days. His mother lived 2 more than that. I had dug both graves on the rise behind the corral with the same spade in the same week of a march that I have never described to a living soul and will not now. I knew the exact weight of a small box. I had carried it. So I lay there and I thought about a freight wagon and a county home and the splitting of a girl from a boy from a woman. And somewhere toward morning I quit lying to myself about why I hadn't told her uncle was dead. It wasn't that I wasn't sure. It was that I already knew what telling her would set in motion, and some part of me, older than my hardness and buried under it, had refused to start the wheel. I got up before light and built the fire and was setting coffee to boil when she came out, already dressed, already braided, the carpetbag in her hand. "We'll go on to Tama Wells with the next freight," she said. "I'll work my passage if there's work. I won't sit on your charity, Mr. Creel, only board till the wagon comes and I'll earn that." She'd settled it in the night same as I had and come to the opposite end. She meant to throw herself on the town, on her uncle, on the man I knew was dead. "Sit down," I said. "Mr. Creel." "Sit down, Miss Marsh. There's a thing I should have told you yesterday and didn't, and I'm a poor enough man for the not telling. So sit, and let me do the rest of it poorly too, but at least do it." She sat. The children were still asleep behind the curtain I'd rigged. The coffee began to tick in the pot. "A sa renfew died last spring," I said. "Pleurisy. The freight yard was sold to the Coombs outfit by July. I've hauled out of that lot twice since. There's no renfew in Tama Wells. I knew it when you stepped off the stage, and I let you go to bed thinking otherwise, and that was a coward's mercy and no mercy at all. I'm sorry. I have seen men take hard news. I have seen them take it loud and take it quiet, take it with their fists and take it with their hats in their hands. I had never until that morning seen anyone take it the way Esther Marsh took it, which was to go absolutely white and absolutely still, and then after a moment to reach out and turn the coffee pot's handle a half-inch so it sat truer on the iron, a small useless tidying motion, a hand reaching for the one thing it could set right, and to say, in a voice scoured clean of everything but fact, "Then there is nowhere. There's a county." "I know what the county does." She looked up. There was nothing soft in her face and nothing breaking either. It had gone past breaking to something harder and clearer. They'll send Tom to the Hadley farm to pull stumps, and Lucy to whoever wants a girl to mind bobbies and me to scrub for the board, and we'll see each other Sundays if there's a Sunday wagon. I know exactly what the county does, Mr. Creel. Our father died of the fever in March, our mother in April. Our uncle in Coldwater wouldn't have us past a fortnight, said 3 was too many mouths, and a girl my age ought to find a husband and not be hauling children. So I took the children and what money there was, and I came for the only other kin we have, and you've just told me he's a year in the ground. She drew a breath. So, there is nowhere. I'd rather know it than not. The coffee boiled over. I took it off. My hands weren't quite steady, which surprised me. I hadn't had unsteady hands in years. You'll winter here, I said. I had not decided to say it. I want that understood. I had lain awake all night deciding the opposite and the freight wagon mercy of it, and then I'd opened my mouth and the truth had come out instead, the real one, the one under the hardness, the one I'd been refusing since the stage rolled off. I dug 2 graves on that rise with my own spade. I was not going to put a woman and 2 children on a wagon to be split up like a poor hand of cards. Not from my door. Not while there was a fire and a roof and meal in the bin. I keep this station for the line, I said before she could speak. Coaches in the season, freight year-round, the company's stock to feed and shoe. It's work enough for 2, and I do it as one because there's no help that'll stay this far out. You said you'd earn your board. Earn it then. Through the winter till the spring run opens and you can go to Tama Wells or anywhere else you choose with a stake to do it on. That's not charity. That's wages. I've not had a thing in this house mended or a meal I didn't burn in 6 years, and I'm sick of both. She studied me a long moment. Whatever she was looking for, I tried to let her find it. You knew yesterday, she said, and you let me hope. I did. Don't do it again. She stood and tied her apron, my dead wife's apron, off the peg by the stove. The first I knew she'd already found it and took the burned skillet out of my hand. If a thing's true, tell me, even when it's bad, especially when it's bad. I can stand any true thing. It's the kind, hopeful lies that have liked to killed us. She set the skillet in the wash. Now, show me the stores and the stock and what's wanted and we'll start. And that was the whole of how it was decided. No softness in it on either side. A bad confession and a hard bargain over a boiled-over pot, at first light, with 2 children asleep behind a curtain. I have heard people say love comes in like the spring. Mine came in like that morning, cold and honest, and at the cost of admitting what I'd done wrong. She was not lying about the work. By the second day, she had the stores inventoried in a hand neater than the company's own clerks, and had found 3 weevils worth of waste I'd been carrying and stopped it. By the 4th, she'd mended every seam in the place that had been gaping since the spring of my widowing, and retied the curtain off the bunks into a proper room, and set Lucy to keeping the tables swept and Tom to carrying kindling, small chores, child's chores. But the children went after them like work was a thing they'd missed and were glad to have back. I'd forgotten what a house sounded like with people in it. The wind hadn't changed and the country hadn't changed, but the silence I'd kept for 6 years had a hole knocked in it now, a child's question, the scrape of a chair, Esther humming low over the wash, some old tune I half knew and couldn't place. I caught myself the first week standing in the barn longer than the stock wanted, just to be where the noise wasn't, because the noise did something to my chest I had no name for and didn't trust. Tom started following me to the barn the second week. I didn't ask him to, and I didn't tell him not to. He'd appear at my elbow at the corral and stand there with his hands jammed in the 2 big coat of mine Esther had cut down for him, watching me grain the company horses and shoe the lame ones and mend tack, and after a few days he started handing me things, the rasp before I asked for it, the right nail. He had a quick eye. He didn't talk much, which suited me, but when he did it was always the one real question. Why do you trim the hoof before you nail? Why does that one bite and the others don't? Did you ever get throwed? Once, I told him, twice, the second time I had it coming. What'd you do to have it coming? Got proud. Horse'll cure a man of proud faster than a preacher. He thought about that the way he thought about everything, careful and slow, and nodded, and handed me the rasp. Lucy was harder. Lucy had taken her sister's watchfulness and worn it small, and she watched me for a month the way a person watches whether they don't trust to hold. She was polite. She was useful. She did not warm. I understood it. She'd had a father and lost him, and an uncle who turned them out, and she wasn't a child to spend her trust twice in a season on a strange hard man at a relay station. So I let her be. I'd learned with horses you don't chase the shy one. You let it come to the grain on its own clock, and you don't make a thing of it when it does. It was a drawing that did it in the end. Lucy drew. Esther had got her a stub of pencil from the company stores against my board, and the girl filled the backs of old waybills with the things she saw, the horses, the stove, the mountains, her brother. One evening I found one she'd left on the table. The station, drawn small and careful, with smoke coming out of the pipe and light in the window and 3 small figures in the door. And standing off to the side, apart, a fourth, a tall figure in a hat, near the corral, not in the door with the others but turned toward it. I knew who the fourth was, and I understood from the wear of him in the picture, apart but turned toward, exactly how the girl saw me, honest as her sister, outside but facing in. I didn't say a word about it. But the next morning I built a low bench by the window where the light was best, and I didn't say what it was for, and Lucy found it and looked at it and looked at me, and sat down on it with her waybills and her pencil stub in the good light, and that was all. That was the whole of it. But she'd come to the grain. Esther saw everything. She didn't say anything either. But that evening when she set my plate down, she said it a little different. Not a servant setting a hired man's plate, but a person setting a place at her own table, and her hand rested half a second on the back of my chair before she went to her own, and neither of us spoke of that either. We were neither of us people who spoke of things. That was a thing we had in common before we had anything else. We let the work say it. There is a kind of courting that happens entirely in the passing of tools and the keeping of plates warm and the not saying, and it is slower than the spoken kind and surer, and I would not trade the winter of it for any words. The blizzard came the first week of December and shut us in 9 days. I'd seen the sky bruise up the afternoon before and brought the stock close and split a winter's wood into the lean-to off the kitchen and hauled water against the freeze. And I told Esther plain what was coming so she could ready the house, because she told me to tell her true things, and the truth was a man can die 15 steps from his own door in a sage flats whiteout and has. We strung a rope from the door to the barn so I could feed the stock without losing the world. And then it came down on us like the lid coming down on a pot, and for 9 days the only outdoors there was the length of that rope, hand over hand, twice a day, to the horses and back. It should have been the worst of the winter. It was the best of it. There was nothing to do in those 9 days but be a family, and so we were one before any of us had decided to be. We were shut in a warm box in the middle of a screaming white nothing, and the box had a stove and meal and 4 people in it, and the days went by in chores and talk and Lucy's drawings and Tom's questions and Esther's low humming. And at night I'd bank the fire and listen to the 3 of them breathing behind the curtain and feel something I'd thought died in March 6 years back come creaking and unwilling back to life in me, like a spring thawing under ice, painful the way thaw is painful. On the 6th night the wind dropped for an hour the way it does, and Esther came and sat at the table across from me with 2 cups of the chicory I kept for when the coffee ran low, and she pushed one to me, and for once she talked. She told me about their father, who kept a small mercantile in a played-out mining town and read aloud to them every night of their lives, and about their mother, who could make a holiday out of cornmeal and a Sunday, and about the fever that came through in the spring and took both inside 6 weeks, and the uncle in cold water, and the long arithmetic of trying to keep 3 people fed and together on a shrinking pile of coin while the world kept telling her, the uncle, the town. The freight clerk who sold her the tickets, That a woman of 4 and 20 had no business hauling 2 children across a winter country and ought to settle herself and let the county take the young ones, like a woman was a thing that couldn't carry a family alone. Everyone had a place to put us, she said. Everyone but us. The uncle had a place the county home. The county had a place 3 different ones. The clerk had a place back the way we came. Nobody's place ever had room for the 3 of us in it together. She turned the cup in her hands. I'd have walked us into the snow before I let them split Tom from Lucy. I'd thought it out. I knew exactly how far the money went and what I'd do when it didn't. You don't want to know the rest of what I'd thought out, Mr. Creel. Jonah, I said. If you're going to tell me that, you'd best call me Jonah. She looked up. The lamp was low. The wind had gone still in its hour, and the whole white world held its breath outside, and inside there was just the stove and the 2 cups and her thin, scoured face across the table from mine. Jonah, she said. You don't have to tell me the rest, I said. I know the shape of it. I've stood near that country myself, the one a person walks toward when there's no room for them anywhere. March of the year I lost my wife and my boy, I stood as near it as a man stands and still come back. It was the first I'd said of it to anyone in 6 years, and I heard my own voice say it like it belonged to some other man. I came back because there was stock to feed and no one else to feed it. That's a poor reason, and it's the true one. Sometimes a person's only kept alive by a thing that needs them in the morning. Yes, she said, very quiet. That's exactly it. We sat with that a while. Then the wind came back up its scale into the long howl, and she gathered the cups, and that was the most either of us had ever said and the closest we'd come, and neither of us reached the last inch across the table, and I have been glad of it since. There's a kind of slow that's a kind of respect. We were both of us people who'd had things taken fast, and we were not going to take this one fast even from each other. On the 9th day the storm blew itself out, and the sun came up on a world made over in white, blinding. The drifts curled up over the corral rail, and the mountains standing close and clean. And Tom hollered the house awake, and we all 4 went out into it. And I watched a woman and 2 children stand in waist-deep new snow and laugh. Actually laugh. All 3. The boy floundering and the girl pelting him, and Esther with her head back and her thin face open for once. All the holding up gone out of her shoulders, and I stood in the door of my own station with the cold burning clean in my lungs, and I understood I had stopped. At some point I couldn't name, being a man who was only waiting out his life. The Coombs freight man came in late January, on the first ox train through the broken trail, and his name was Pell, and he is the only thing in this account I have to set down with any heat, even now. He'd hauled the company's winter stores to me before, and I knew him for a small man in a large coat, the kind that's careful with other people's money and careless with other people's lives, because the two have never once been the same thing to him. He came into the warm and looked the place over, the mended curtain, the bench by the window, the children, Esther at the stove in the apron, and I watched him add it up in a glance and get the sum wrong in the particular way his kind always gets it wrong. "Didn't know you'd taken a woman, Creel," he said, and the way he said taken I had him by the collar in my mind before he'd got the rest out. "Company no. They're particular about who's quartered on the line, liability." He warmed his hands at my stove. "These the Renfrew kin, then. Word came down the wire there was a woman put off at Stone Tank, asking after old Renfrew. County's been wondering where they got to. There's a wagon could carry them down the broke trail come the next train. Get them settled proper. Sage County's got a home takes in just this sort, orphans, indigent women, roof and board and work. Better than freezing on a relay, eh? More fitting." The room had gone very quiet. Lucy had stopped her pencil. Tom had moved, without seeming to mean to, a half-step nearer me. And Esther stood at the stove with her back to all of us and her spine gone straight as a ramrod, and I watched her hand close slow on the edge of the iron. And I knew that she was waiting, not for me to fight it. She'd never once asked a man to fight a thing for her, but to hear what I would do, the way Lucy had watched the weather, to learn what kind of place she'd been wintering in after all. "They're not Renfrew kin to the county," I said. They're my hire, cook and keep station and stock, wages and board on the books since November. I said it slow and flat so there'd be no mistaking it for a thing said in heat. And the woman's got a name. It's Miss Marsh. You'll use it under my roof or you'll wait your stores outside in your wagon and I'll tell Coombs which it was and why. Now Creole. There's no wagon carrying anybody anywhere off this station that doesn't want to go, I said. Not down a broke trail in January, not to any county home, not split up 4 ways for the convenience of a man who's never once in his life had to choose between bad and worse. Miss Marsh and her brother and sister have a place. It's here. They've earned it twice over, which is more than I can say for half the freight you've hauled me. I opened the door on the cold. Stores in the lean-to. There's coffee when it's stacked. And Pell, you can tell the county the stone tank relay's got no orphans and no indigents. It's got a keeper and a hired woman and 2 children under his roof, and the lot of them are fine. He stacked the stores. He drank the coffee, because cold is cold and a small man is still a man. He didn't say taken again. And when his train pulled out down the broke trail in the blue cold of the next morning, Esther came and stood beside me in the door to watch it go, the way she'd watched the first stage go in November, but not the same way at all, because this time she was watching it leave without her. And there is all the world's difference between those 2 watchings. You needn't have made it your fight, she said. I'd have managed Pell. I know you would. I made it mine anyway. I looked at her. There's a difference between a person can manage alone and a person ought to have to. You've been the second kind too long, seems to me. No call for it here. She didn't answer that in words, but her hand found the back of my hand on the doorframe, cold to cold, and held it, and we stood there and watched the wagon go small down the white road, 2 people not saying a thing, which by then was the most fluent language either of us had. Tom took the lung fever in February. It came on him in a night, the way it does with children fine at supper, burning by midnight, by morning a small hot weight in the bunk with his breath going quick and shallow, and a sound in it I knew and hated. The same wet rattle I'd heard once before in a smaller chest in a colder March. Esther had him stripped and sponged and propped before I was fully awake, working fast and steady with her face like stone, and she looked up at me over the boy and said the truest thing she could have said, which was, "Tell me how far the doctor is and whether we can reach him. Don't soften it." Tama Wells, 2 days hard in summer, the trails broke and there's weather building west. A day and a half if I run the company team into the ground and don't get caught out. I was already pulling my boots. I'll go. You'll die on the grade if that weather comes down on you in the open. Maybe. Jonah, she didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. If you die on the grade, we lose you and the doctor and Tom both, because I can't nurse a boy this sick and feed the stock and keep the fire 9 days alone, and you know it. Think, don't be brave, be right. She was right. And it stopped me with 1 boot on. I knew lung fever. I'd watched it the once helpless with a doctor 4 hours off and arrived too late. And I knew the thing that doctor had said when he came, too late, the thing that has stayed with me 20 years. There's not much I'd have done you can't do. Keep him warm, keep him breathing the steam, keep the fluid moving, keep him from the fright of it and let the fever break or not. The body does the rest. I just charge for the watching. All right, I said and took the boot off. All right, we don't run, we do the watching ourselves. And we did, 5 days and 5 nights. We rigged a tent of blankets over the bunk and kept a kettle going under it so the boy breathed wet warm air. We propped him up so the fluid couldn't settle. We sponged the fever and dripped broth and willow tea between his cracked lips a spoon at a time around the clock. The 2 of us in shifts so one always slept while one watched. The way you keep a fire on a bad night. Never let it go to coals. Lucy carried water and kept the kettle filled and did not cry where Tom could see, because Esther told her once, quiet, that a sick person takes fright from the faces over him. And so the girl learned to do her crying in the lean-to and come back in with her face washed, 10 years old, and it broke something in me to watch her learn it, and it has never quite mended. The fever broke on the 5th night near dawn, the way they do, All at once, the boy soaking through the sheets and then suddenly cool and slack and breathing slow and even, deep down in true sleep instead of the shallow, burning kind. Esther had her hand on his chest feeling for it, and she felt it change, and she looked up at me across the lamp. And her face, that scoured, stone, holding-up face that I had not once seen break in 3 months of true things, her face came apart all at once into the plain, ugly weeping of pure relief. Silent, her hand pressed over her own mouth so as not to wake him, and I came around the bunk and put my arms around her without a single thought of whether I had leave to. And she turned into my chest and shook, and I held her up the way you hold up a thing that has held itself up alone too long, and over her bent head I looked at the boy sleeping easy and I thought, not this one. This one I get to keep. When she'd quieted, she didn't pull away. She stayed where she was, her face against my coat, and she said, muffled, I didn't tell you the rest. That night in the storm, what I'd thought out for if the money ran past nothing. You don't have to. I want to. I'm done not telling you things. She stepped back enough to look up, her face wet and plain and unguarded, the held-up gone clean out of it. I thought I'd walk them to the warmest place we could reach and tell them a story till they slept, and then, that's as far as I'd let myself think it, but you know how it ends. Because the alternative was to watch them split and starved and worked to nothing by strangers, and I thought a quick warm dark was kinder than a long cold one. That's the country I was walking toward, Jonah, the November you put me off thinking I had nowhere. I was that near it, with them. And you said you'll winter here, and I have not been near it since, not one single day, and I didn't even mark when I stopped being near it. I just woke one morning and it was behind me. She put her hand flat on my chest where the boy's small hand had been. You didn't take us in. You called us back. There's a difference, and I know it because I've stood in both countries. I have never been a man with words for the large things. I had none then. So I did the only thing I had, which was to put my hand over her hand on my chest and hold it there and say the truest small thing I owned. Stay, not for the winter, for the rest of it. I'm not asking you to need me. You don't need any man, and you've proved it past arguing. I'm asking because I want you, plain, you and Lucy and that boy. I want the three of you at my table till they put me on the rise out back. And there's no county nor freight man nor uncle that's getting one of you off this place while I draw breath. That's not a bargain. There's no wages in it and no board. It's just the truth, and you told me to tell you true things, even the ones I'm bad at. The boy stirred in the bunk and we both went still and watched until he settled. Then Esther looked back up at me, and she was smiling, the first full smile I'd had off her in 3 months, and it took 10 years and a winter off her face, and she said, I'd have stayed for the wage. I'll stay for that gladly instead, but I'll have it understood, Jonah Creel, I'm not staying because there's nowhere else. I could go to Tom Wells in the spring with a clean stake and make our way. You taught me the books, and I'm not afraid of work, and I know that now. I know it the way I didn't in November. There is somewhere else now. There's a whole world of somewhere else. She turned her hand under mine so our fingers laced. I'm staying because of all the somewheres. This is the one I want. That's the whole of it. I don't need you. I choose you. Mind you remember the difference, because I'll not have it any other way. I'll remember it, I said. I'd not respect you if it were any other way. And that was the asking and the answering, done over a sleeping boy at the gray end of the worst night, with no ring and no word but the plain ones, which were the only kind either of us trusted, and the only kind that ever held. We were married in the spring, when the run opened and the circuit preacher came through on the first eastbound, a Tuesday, with the snow gone off everything but the high peaks and the sage coming green-gray and the basin full of light. It was a small doing. The preacher, and old Hardesty, the stage driver who'd set them down in November and never forgave himself for it once he heard the size of what he'd nearly done, and a few of the regular line men who timed their run to be there, and a Coombs teamster, not Pell. Pell had quit the route, and I won't pretend I was sorry. Lucy made Esther a wreath of the first wild things off the slope, and Tom, strong again, brown again, grown an inch off the winter, stood up beside me in a brushed coat and held the ring I'd had a teamster fetch from Tom Wells, and dropped it once, and we all laughed, which is the right sound to have at a wedding. Esther didn't wear my first wife's apron that day. She'd folded it away clean weeks before of her own thought, and said it should go to Sarah's people if there were any, and I'd said there weren't, and she'd said then it should be kept honored and not worn out at a stove, and so it was put away with the small box of Sarah's things, and Esther came to me at the wedding in a dress of her own making, plain and new, and the not wearing of the apron was a kindness so exact and so unspoken that I understood, watching her come up the room on Hardesty's arm, that I had married a woman who would spend her life seeing the things I couldn't say and answering them before I'd found the words. The children call me. Lucy started it first, which surprised everyone, the watchful one out ahead of the warm one. The spring after the wedding said it plain across the table, passed the salt, Pa, and never made a thing of it, and watched my face just once to see if it was all right, and saw that it was more than all right, and went back to her plate. Tom followed inside the week. I won't try to set down what that word did to a man who'd buried the only child he'd thought he'd ever name. Some things a man keeps even from a true account. The freight yard in Tom Wells' old refuse, the one Esther came west for, came up for sale again 4 years on when the Coombs outfit broke up, and I had the money by then, and we talked it over a long evening, and we bought it in her name, in Esther Marsh Creel's name on the deed, because it was her uncle's once and her journey toward it that brought her to my door. And because a woman who told me to my face she chose me and didn't need me ought to have a thing of her own that was hers outright and no man's gift. She ran it better than Renfrew ever had. Tom keeps it now. Lucy married a Tom Wells schoolmaster and teaches the little ones their letters and still draws. There's a picture of this station on the wall of the schoolhouse, the one she did over from memory, with the smoke and the lit window and 3 figures in the door and a 4th by the corral, except in the new one she did the 4th one in the door with the rest. She moved him in. She'll tell you she doesn't remember the first one. I keep the first one in the box with Sarah's things and my first boy's, because a man can honor his whole life at once if he's lucky, and I have been past all deserving lucky. I'm an old man now, and I still keep the relay. Though the line talks every year of running the spur through and shutting the high road, and one of these years they will, and there'll be no more stone tank. Esther's gray and I'm grayer, and the work's mostly Tom's reach now, but we keep the fire and we keep the window lit, and that's the thing I set out to tell and have taken the long way too. Travelers still come down the Cinnabar Road in the dark, cold, and turned around and farther from anywhere than they meant to be, the way travelers do, and they see the one light. Out across all that black sage country, there's just the one warm gold square of our window, and they make for it the way Tom made for the stove that first November day, the way a thing in the cold makes for the only warm there is. And they knock and we open, and there's a fire and a meal and a place to lie out of the wind, and we ask no coin of them they haven't got, and we put nobody back out in the cold, not ever, not once in all the years, because I learned the worth of an open door the hard way, from a hard man myself, who near as anything kept his shut. Esther says the same thing every time after, when the travelers fed and bedded and the lamps turned low and it's just the two of us and the wind. She says it quiet, like a thing she's still a little astonished by, all these years on. She says, somebody opened the door for me once when I had nowhere, so we keep it open. And then she banks the fire and we leave the window lit, and we go to bed in the warm with the cold shut out and the door shut soft but never locked, and that the lit window, the unlocked door, the woman who chose a hard road's hard man and made a home of him, that is the whole of what I have to leave, and it is more than I ever thought to own, and every word of it is true.